The night everything changed began like any other celebration of success. The ballroom was filled with light, soft music, and quiet conversations between powerful people. Cameras flashed as the billionaire CEO stepped onto the stage. He was known around the world as a man who could solve problems faster than anyone else in the room. Investors trusted him. Employees admired him. Reporters followed his every move. To most people, he looked strong and unshakable. His company had just reported record profits. His latest speech about innovation was trending online. He stood tall in his tailored suit, calm and confident, thanking his team for another historic year. But behind the smile, something felt off. For weeks, he had been feeling tired in a way that sleep could not fix. At first, he blamed it on travel. Then he blamed it on stress. He had been flying between countries, attending meetings, giving interviews, and pushing through tight deadlines. Feeling exhausted seemed normal for someone living at that speed. Still, the headaches were new. They came suddenly and left just as fast. Sometimes his hands trembled slightly when he held a glass of water. He ignored it. Powerful men did not slow down for small things. As he continued his speech that evening, the lights above him felt brighter than usual. The words on the screen behind him seemed slightly blurry. He paused for a second, pressing his fingers gently against the side of the podium. The audience thought he was building suspense. He tried to continue, but his chest tightened. A strange wave of dizziness rushed over him. His vision darkened around the edges. He took one small step back. Then he collapsed. At first, there was silence. The kind of silence that comes when people think something is part of the show. But when he didn't move, panic spread across the room. Security rushed forward. Someone called for medical help. Phones came out as whispers turned into shouts. Within minutes, emergency responders were inside the ballroom. They checked his pulse. It was weak and irregular. His breathing was shallow. His skin looked pale. He was rushed out through a side exit, away from cameras, into a waiting ambulance. The sirens cut through the night as the vehicle sped toward one of the most advanced hospitals in the city. News spread fast. By the time the ambulance reached the hospital entrance, social media was already filled with rumors. Some said it was a heart attack. Others said it was stress. A few claimed it was something worse. Inside the emergency room, doctors worked quickly. Blood tests were ordered. Scans were performed. Machines surrounded his bed, beeping steadily. The first test did not show a clear cause. His heart rhythm was unstable, but not in a way that pointed to a typical heart attack. His blood pressure was dropping. His oxygen levels fluctuated without reason. The medical team exchanged confused looks. The hospital director made several urgent calls that night. Within hours, specialists began arriving. A cardiologist reviewed his heart function. A neurologist studied his brain scans. An infectious disease expert checked for rare viruses. An autoimmune specialist looked for signs that his body might be attacking itself. 16 specialists in total were assigned to his case, each one respected in their field. Each one used to solving complex medical mysteries. But this case did not follow the rules. By morning, his condition had not improved. He remained unconscious. His organs began showing signs of stress. His kidneys were not filtering properly. His liver enzymes were rising. His family arrived at the hospital before sunrise. They were taken into a private waiting room. The lead doctor spoke carefully, choosing every word with caution. "We are still trying to understand what is happening," he said. "We are doing everything possible." It was not the reassurance they hoped for. Outside the hospital, reporters gathered. News vans lined the street. Employees of his company refreshed their phones constantly, waiting for updates. The stock market reacted almost immediately. Shares began to dip as uncertainty grew. Inside the intensive care unit, the mood was tense. The specialists met in a glass conference room overlooking the city. Charts were projected onto a large screen. Lab results were reviewed again and again. Every possibility was discussed. Could be a rare infection? One doctor asked. The markers don't match, another replied. What about toxin exposure? Nothing significant in the standard panel. Neurological event? Brain imaging is mostly clear. Hours passed. Coffee cups piled up on the table. No one wanted to admit it out loud, but they were running out of obvious answers. Meanwhile, the CEO lay still in his hospital bed, connected to machines that breathed and monitored for him. The man who once made billion-dollar decisions in seconds now depended entirely on a team searching for clues. His personal assistant sat quietly in a hallway chair, replaying the last few weeks in her mind. She remembered how he had brushed off concerns when she suggested he see a doctor for the headaches. He had laughed and said, "I don't have time to be sick." Now time seemed to be the only thing slipping away. Late that afternoon, his heart rhythm suddenly spiked. Nurses rushed to stabilize him. Medication was adjusted. The room filled with urgent voices. After several tense minutes, the monitors returned to a steadier pattern. But the message was clear. His body was not stable. The team expanded their testing. They ran advanced immune panels. They screened for rare genetic conditions. They checked for environmental triggers. Nothing explained why a healthy, active billionaire in his early 50s would collapse without warning. As night fell again, the hospital lights glowed against the dark sky. The second emergency meeting began. One specialist spoke honestly. "We may be dealing with something extremely rare, something we don't see often." Another added, "We need to prepare for possible organ support if things worsen." The words hung heavy in the room. In the waiting area, his family tried to stay strong. They answered calls from board members and close friends. They assured everyone that he was receiving the best care possible. But even the best care sometimes meets a mystery it cannot solve. On the third day, his kidneys began failing more clearly. Dialysis was discussed. His immune system showed signs of extreme inflammation, but without a clear source. It was as if his body had turned against itself without warning. The specialist reviewed his travel history. He had recently visited multiple countries for business meetings. They tested for rare tropical diseases. Again, results came back negative. The pressure on the medical team grew. 16 experts, endless resources, and still no answers. Privately, some of them began to question whether they were missing something small but critical. In the intensive care unit, the machines continued their steady rhythm. The CEO's face looked calm, almost peaceful. It was hard to believe that inside, his body was fighting a silent battle. The hospital director gave a short statement to the press. "He is in critical condition. Our team is working around the clock." Those words echoed across news channels worldwide. For the first time in his life, the billionaire was not the one in control of the story. He was the subject of it. And inside that hospital, surrounded by 16 of the best medical minds, a troubling truth slowly became clear. They did not know how to save him. Yet, across the city, far from the private hospital rooms and flashing cameras, a small apartment sat above a noisy repair shop. The paint on the walls was slightly faded, and the kitchen light flickered if it stayed on too long. It was not a place anyone would notice twice. Inside that apartment lived a single father and his 8-year-old daughter. His morning started before sunrise. He would wake quietly, careful not to disturb his daughter sleeping in the small bedroom they shared. He would pack her lunch, iron her school uniform, and leave a short note on the kitchen table reminding her to finish her homework and lock the door after school. He worked as a maintenance technician at the same hospital where the billionaire lay in critical condition. He fixed broken lights, repaired leaking pipes, checked wiring panels, and handled small emergencies that no one else wanted to deal with. Years ago, his life had looked very different. He had once trained as a paramedic. Back then, he wore a uniform, responded to emergency calls, and helped people in their worst moments. He loved the work. He loved the feeling of being useful when someone's life depended on quick thinking. But after his wife passed away suddenly from a sudden illness, everything changed. Grief hit him hard. Raising a young child alone felt overwhelming. The long night shifts as a paramedic became impossible. He needed steady hours, predictable pay, something that would allow him to be home for school pickups and bedtime stories. So he left the field he once loved and took a maintenance job at the hospital. It paid less. It came with little recognition, but it kept the lights on. He followed the news about the billionaire like everyone else. It was impossible not to. Every screen in the hospital cafeteria showed updates. Staff whispered about the case in hallways. Some were excited. Some were anxious. A few were simply curious. He did not pay much attention at first. To him, it was just another patient in a building filled with them. On the fourth night after the collapse, he was assigned to fix a faulty electrical panel near the restricted intensive care wing. The hallway was quiet except for the sough of machines and distant footsteps. As he worked with his tools, he heard voices coming from a nearby conference room. The door was slightly open. Inside, several doctors were speaking in low but urgent tones. He tried not to listen. It wasn't his place. But certain words reached him clearly. Autoimmune reaction. Systemic inflammation. No clear infection source. Environmental trigger? He paused for a moment, holding a screwdriver midair. Environmental trigger. Something about that phrase made his stomach tighten. He had heard similar discussions before. Years ago, during one long shift as a paramedic, he had responded to a call at a rural warehouse. A middle-aged worker had collapsed without warning. The symptoms had been confusing. High inflammation, organ stress, no obvious cause. At the time, local doctors struggled to understand what was happening. Later, it turned out the man had been exposed to a rare mix of industrial chemicals combined with mold inside the building. The combination triggered an extreme immune response. It was rare, unusual, easy to miss. The memory had stayed with him because it taught him something important. Sometimes the body does not fail because of one big event. Sometimes it fails because of a quiet chain of small exposures. He shook his head and went back to work. He was just a maintenance technician now. 16 specialists were already handling the billionaire's case. They knew far more than he did. Still, the thought wouldn't leave. The next day, during his lunch break, he sat alone in the cafeteria scrolling through news updates on his phone. The headline said the CEO's condition had worsened. His kidneys were not improving. Doctors were still searching for answers. He felt a strange mix of concern and hesitation. Who was he to think he could add anything useful? That evening, after picking up his daughter from school, he helped her with math homework at the small kitchen table. She talked about a class project and asked if he would come to school on Friday to see her presentation. He smiled and promised he would try, but his mind was elsewhere. Later that night, after she fell asleep, he opened an old storage box from the closet. Inside were notebooks from his paramedic training days. He flipped through pages filled with handwritten notes about rare conditions, emergency responses, and unusual case studies. He found the page he was looking for. A short paragraph about toxin exposure combined with fungal spores. It mentioned severe immune overreaction, rapid organ stress, and difficulty diagnosing through standard panels. He read it twice. The symptoms sounded close to what he had overheard, but close was not enough. The following morning at work, he paid more attention to the hospital environment itself. The billionaire had been traveling constantly. Private jets, international meetings, industrial visits, construction site tours, high-tech factories. Exposure could have happened anywhere. He knew he was making assumptions. He did not have access to full medical reports. He only had fragments of overheard conversation and a distant memory. Yet something inside him kept saying, "Don't ignore this." On the sixth day, the hospital atmosphere felt heavier. Nurses moved quickly. Doctors looked tired. Even administrators seemed tense. During a supply delivery near the ICU wing, he overheard another conversation. "We've ruled out most common triggers," one doctor said, "unless we're missing a rare compound interaction." The words hit him like a quiet alarm. Rare compound interaction. He felt his pulse quicken. For several minutes, he stood frozen in the hallway, debating with himself. If he spoke up, what would happen? At best, they would ignore him. At worst, they would report him for interfering in medical matters outside his role. He had a daughter to think about. He could not risk losing his job. But then he imagined the ICU room upstairs. Machines breathing for a man who once ran an empire. Family members sitting in silence. Doctors searching for answers. He remembered why he became a paramedic in the first place. Not for recognition, not for status, but to help when something felt wrong. He went home that night restless. His daughter noticed. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He nodded, forcing a smile. Just tired. After she went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table again. This time, he searched online medical journals through public databases. He read about rare immune storms triggered by combined environmental exposures. Some cases were misdiagnosed at first. Some were caught only after someone thought outside the usual patterns. He closed his laptop slowly. He was not claiming to know the answer, but he might know a direction. The next morning, he made a decision that scared him. He would request a short meeting with the hospital's chief physician, not to challenge the specialists, not to act like an expert, but simply to share an observation. As he walked into work that day, his hands felt slightly unsteady. He rehearsed the words in his mind. He would speak respectfully, clearly, calmly. He had no title, no reputation, no authority, just a memory, and a feeling he could not ignore. Upstairs, 16 specialists continued their search for answers. Downstairs, a maintenance technician prepared to step far outside his role. And he had no idea that this quiet decision would change more than one L. Ife, for the next few days, the billionaire's condition continued to worsen. Despite 16 of the top specialists working tirelessly, his body refused to respond to any treatment. The heart monitors beeped erratically. Machines hummed around him, keeping track of every vital sign. But even the most advanced technology could not fix what they could not understand. Doctors held emergency meetings in the conference room, reviewing charts, lab results, and imaging again and again. Each possibility seemed to lead to a dead end. They tested for rare diseases, viruses, and environmental factors. Nothing matched the symptoms perfectly. Each specialist brought their expertise, their experience, and their intuition, but still, the cause remained a mystery. Meanwhile, the maintenance technician wrestled with his decision. Every night he went home to his small apartment. He could barely eat or sleep. The image of the billionaire lying in the ICU haunted him. The more he thought about it, the more he felt certain that the answer might lie in something rare, something that had happened years ago in his paramedic days. He remembered the patient in that abandoned warehouse. The man had collapsed suddenly, organs failing, immune system attacking itself in confusion. He had been exposed to chemicals and mold spores in a combination that nobody expected. Doctors at the time had been confused, but careful observation and a risky, unconventional treatment had saved him. The memory was vivid. It was not just a memory. It was a guide, and he knew that ignoring it could cost a life. The maintenance technician decided he could no longer stay silent. He understood the risk. Speaking up could jeopardize his job, even bring trouble if he was accused of interfering. But inaction was worse. He needed to try. He asked the hospital administration politely if he could have a short audience with the chief physician. At first, they hesitated. After all, he was a maintenance worker. He had no medical degree, but something in his tone convinced him to allow a brief meeting. He was led into a spacious office where the chief physician sat behind a large desk. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. The walls were lined with books on medical history, clinical research, and framed certificates. The weight of the hospital's reputation pressed quietly in the air. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing of his heart. "Doctor," he began, "I'm not a specialist. I'm just a maintenance worker here. But I think I may have seen something similar before." The chief physician leaned back, eyebrows raised with expression neutral. "Go on," he said. He explained the memory of the patient in the warehouse. He carefully described the exposure to rare chemicals and mold spores, the extreme immune response, the rapid organ stress, and the treatment that had worked under desperate circumstances. He spoke slowly, choosing words carefully, making sure he was clear and respectful. The chief physician listened quietly, eyes narrowing in concentration. He did not interrupt, but asked for clarifications where needed. "And you're suggesting this could be happening here?" he asked. "I don't know for certain," the maintenance worker replied honestly, "but it matches some of the symptoms I overheard discussed by the specialists. And it worked before in a situation that seemed hopeless." The room was silent for a moment. The chief physician tapped a pen on the desk, considering the information. "Do you have any documentation?" he asked finally. "Yes," he said, pulling out a worn notebook from his bag. He handed it over. It contained notes from his paramedic training, descriptions of unusual cases, and a summary of the rare combination that triggered extreme immune reactions. The chief physician flipped through the pages, glancing at graphs and annotations, then looked up. "This is detailed. Very detailed. You may have something here. We will review it immediately." The maintenance worker nodded, feeling both nervous and hopeful. He left the office, heart pounding, and returned to his work quietly. He did not know if anything would come of it, but at least he had tried. Upstairs, the specialists were still at a loss. Late that afternoon, one of the young residents noticed a small anomaly in the environmental exposure data. It was minor, almost overlooked, but it reminded them of what the maintenance worker had described. They pulled the data and compared it with the patient's recent travels and activities. It was subtle, but a pattern began to emerge. Certain places the CEO had visited were known for rare environmental compounds, combined with traces of fungi and mold. The risk of a rare immune reaction became plausible. They ran additional tests, this time looking specifically for the unusual combination. Machines whirred, blood samples were examined, and the tiniest chemical traces were analyzed. Hours later, the results came back. There it was, evidence of the rare compound interaction that matched the symptoms exactly. The body was reacting to multiple exposures in a way that caused organs to fail and the immune system to attack itself. The specialists exchanged astonished looks. Some rubbed their eyes, unwilling to believe what they saw. Others quickly recalculated dosages, reviewed treatment protocols, and planned the next steps. Meanwhile, the maintenance worker continued his routine, unaware of the breakthrough he had helped set in motion. He checked wiring, replaced lights, and helped nurses with small repairs. He noticed the hospital felt tense, heavier than usual. Some staff exchanged furtive glances. Something was happening. By evening, the chief physician called him again. He was asked to come to the conference room, where specialists had gathered around a large table filled with charts, lab results, and imaging. The atmosphere was urgent, but not tense in the way of failure. It was charged with discovery. "Your observation helped us narrow down the cause," the chief physician said. "We found evidence of a rare compound interaction, triggering a severe autoimmune response. We're preparing an unconventional treatment based on your description and previous case notes." The maintenance worker blinked, unsure if he heard correctly. You mean it could actually work?" "It's risky," the physician replied honestly. "But if we do nothing, the patient will not survive. Your insight gave us a direction." He was not a doctor. He had not studied medicine formally, but his memory, his experience, and his courage had just become the key to saving a life. That night, the ICU was filled with a quiet anticipation. The medical team prepared the treatment carefully. Each step was measured, each dosage calculated with precision. The machines monitored every change. The specialists whispered instructions to each other, working like a well-rehearsed orchestra. The billionaire remained unconscious, unaware of the delicate dance happening around him. Machines beeped softly. Monitors displayed fluctuating numbers, each one a small clue. Nurses adjusted 4 lines. Doctors administered the first phase of the treatment with steady hands. For hours, nothing seemed to change. His heart rate remained unstable. His kidneys were still struggling. The room was filled with quiet tension. Every specialist watched the monitors, willing the treatment to work. Then, slowly, there was a subtle shift. The heart rhythm stabilized, just slightly. The machine showed minor improvements in organ function. It was not dramatic, but it was enough to give hope. The medical team allowed themselves a small, silent sigh. It was the first sign that the path might be correct. The treatment continued carefully, each adjustment made in response to the patient's subtle reactions. Outside the ICU, the family was informed of the change. They were told it was too early to celebrate, but that there was a reason to hope. Relief mixed with caution in their expressions. The maintenance worker returned home late, exhausted from a long day, yet unable to sleep. He thought about the patient, the specialist, and the delicate balance of life and chance. He knew the treatment was only the first step. Recovery would be long and uncertain. But for the first time in days, he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had done the right thing. He had spoken up. And sometimes, speaking up is all it takes to change everything. As he lay in bed, he heard the soft breathing of his daughter in the next room. He smiled faintly, realizing that courage is not about titles or recognition. It is about choosing to act when it matters most, even when no one expects you to. The following morning, the ICU felt tense but different. There was a sense of cautious optimism in the air. Specialists moved with precision, communicating quietly, adjusting equipment, and reviewing charts. The billionaire's condition was slowly responding to the treatment. Small improvements in his organ function gave the doctors a reason to believe they had finally found the right approach. The maintenance worker returned to hospital, knowing he was part of something bigger than any repair job he had ever done. He did not seek recognition. He only wanted to see the life of a man hanging in the balance preserved if he could help. Doctors, nurses, and residents worked around the clock. Some shifts were long, stretching into 18 or 20 hours. Coffee cups piled up in corners. Yet, the room was calm and focused. Every movement was deliberate, every action purposeful. Each specialist contributed their expertise, and each decision was informed by the small insights the maintenance worker had shared. The first critical night passed with minor improvements. The heart rhythm stabilized, and the kidney markers showed subtle changes. The ICU team allowed themselves brief glances of hope, but did not celebrate prematurely. They knew recovery was not guaranteed. During the day, the maintenance worker wandered near the ICU to check on minor repairs and ensure machines and lines were functioning safely. He was careful to stay out of the way, but he watched the team working, learning from the environment he had left years ago when he was a paramedic. He noticed a resident hesitating before adjusting medication. He approached quietly. "I remember something similar," he said softly, "from a case years ago." It was a rare reaction, but the approach involved careful monitoring and small incremental adjustments. Maybe that could help here too. The resident paused and considered it. The doctors were under enormous pressure. Any additional suggestion, even from an unexpected source, had to be weighed carefully. After consulting the lead specialist, they incorporated a small adjustment into the protocol. Once again, the patient responded positively, albeit subtly. Hours turned into days. Each passing day showed incremental improvement. Machines still beeped steadily, but there was less panic in the air. The team cautiously monitored every vital sign, every chemical marker, every organ function. No detail was too small. Every action counted. Throughout the hospital, whispers of the maintenance workers' observations circulated. Staff members debated quietly, unsure of how much to credit him. Some dismissed it entirely, while others quietly admitted that his insight might have been key to finding the missing link in the patient's treatment. Yet, no one questioned the courage it took to speak up when his role was nowhere near the medical hierarchy. Late in the week, the chief physician called the maintenance worker back to the office. He sat down, his hands folded neatly on the desk. "Your insight has been invaluable," the chief physician said, voice calm but firm. "We have seen consistent improvements in the patient's vitals. We are cautiously optimistic that we are turning a corner." The maintenance worker swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. He had only tried to do what felt right. "You understand, of course, that this is far from over," the physician continued. "Recovery will be gradual. There are risks in every step." "I understand," he said simply. "I just wanted to share what I remembered. I never expected anything more." The following days became a delicate balance. The patient was slowly stabilizing, but his body was still fragile. Each phase of treatment required careful monitoring, precise timing, and constant adjustments. Specialists debated dosing, timing, and interactions. Nurses stayed alert, adjusting lines, administering medication, and watching every subtle change. In a quiet corner of the ICU, the billionaire's family waited, watching monitors and speaking in hushed tones. They noticed small changes, a slight increase in alertness, a faint color returning to his cheeks, minor improvements in kidney function. They allowed themselves cautious hope, careful not to overestimate the progress. At night, the maintenance worker returned to his apartment. Exhaustion weighed on him, but he could not sleep. He thought about the patient, the team, and the delicate chain of events that had brought them to this point. He realized that courage is not about the absence of fear. It is about acting despite it. He had acted, and it mattered. One evening, while reviewing case notes in his apartment, he noticed a minor detail he had overlooked. A small chemical compound mentioned in the patient's recent tests matched a rare exposure he had read about years ago. He scribbled down notes, careful to be clear and concise. The next morning, he delivered the note to the lead specialist, who reviewed it quickly. After consultation with the team, they made slight adjustments to the treatment. Once again, the patient responded. Improvements continued, subtle but meaningful. As days passed, the ICU became a place of quiet vigilance rather than panic. The billionaire's vitals strengthened. Machines that had been critical for life support began to show steady numbers. Specialists could take short breaks, knowing the treatment was holding. Nurses allowed themselves small smiles when subtle improvements appeared. One afternoon, the chief physician called a brief meeting. "We are cautiously confident that the treatment plan is working," he said. "We owe a debt of gratitude to everyone who contributed, including observations from outside the traditional medical team." The maintenance worker felt a mixture of relief and humility. He had not sought recognition, and he did not need it. But he understood that life sometimes requires action from unexpected places. Courage, insight, and the willingness to speak up had bridged the gap between despair and hope. Meanwhile, the billionaire remained unconscious, but his body was stabilizing. Machines kept the rhythm steady. Organ function gradually improved. The first signs of recovery were appearing, subtle but undeniable. Staff members began to notice a change in atmosphere. Where there had been tension and anxiety, there was now cautious optimism. People worked efficiently but with a lighter step. Conversations carried hints of hope rather than fear. The family watched in the waiting area, emotions tightly controlled. They spoke softly, discussing small improvements and carefully celebrating minor victories without drawing attention to themselves. Each slight improvement felt monumental, a reminder that persistence, expertise, and unexpected insight could turn the tide. One night, the maintenance worker returned home to find his daughter awake, reading quietly in bed. She looked up and smiled. "Did you help someone today?" she asked innocently. He smiled, brushing her hair back gently. "I'm trying, sweetheart. I'm trying." He realized in that moment that courage and care were not about titles or recognition. They were about doing what was right when it mattered most. His role had shifted from fixing broken equipment to contributing to the saving of a life. It was a reminder that every individual, no matter their position, could make a difference. The ICU continued its careful watch. Specialists adjusted medication, monitored vitals, and recorded every response. Progress was measured in tiny steps. Each improvement built on the last, a testament to teamwork, observation, and persistence. And as the days passed, it became increasingly clear that hope was no longer a distant dream. The treatment was working. Life was returning, slowly but surely, to the billionaire who had once seemed untouchable. The maintenance worker had acted with courage, knowledge, and empathy. He had bridged the gap between the unknown and the known. And in doing so, he had changed the course of a life that seemed destined to end prematurely. He knew the journey was far from over. Recovery would be long, and risks remained. But for the first time in what felt like endless days, there was light in the room, a quiet promise that persistence and courage could overcome even the most baffling challenges. Weeks passed, and the billionaire slowly began to regain consciousness. The ICU staff had grown used to the tension, the quiet shifts, and the constant monitoring, but now there was a different energy in the room. The machines that had once sounded urgent beeps were now steady, almost reassuring. Vitals stabilized, organ function improved, and for the first time in over 2 weeks, there was a sense that the end of this battle might finally be in sight. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the bright hospital lights. At first, he saw only blurred shapes. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry, and his voice barely escaped. A nurse quickly brought water and helped him sip carefully. His hand shook slightly as he held the cup, but each small action was a victory in itself. He looked around, noticing the monitors, the 4 lines, the beeping machines. Then he saw the specialist standing nearby, watching him closely. Gratitude and relief filled his gaze, though he could not yet speak the words. His family was summoned quietly. They arrived, their faces filled with cautious joy. They spoke softly, holding his hands, reassuring him that he was safe, and that he was on the path to recovery. Tears welled in their eyes, but they held him back, not wanting to overwhelm him. News of his awakening spread quickly through the hospital. The staff who had cared for him felt relief mixed with quiet pride. Each small improvement had been hard-won. Every step forward was a testament to their dedication, patience, and the unusual insight that helped guide them. It was then that the chief physician approached him. The billionaire struggled to sit up fully, but with careful assistance, he managed. The physician spoke gently, explaining the situation, the rare medical challenge, and the unconventional treatment that had worked. He carefully avoided mentioning names at first, focusing on facts and progress. The billionaire listened intently. He tried to process the complexity of what had happened. 16 of the nation's top specialists, countless tests, hours of monitoring, and yet it had been a small, unexpected insight that had helped lead to survival. He asked slowly, finally, who noticed it? The chief physician hesitated for a moment, then smiled. It wasn't a doctor at first. It was someone who worked in our hospital in a different capacity. A maintenance worker who remembered a rare case from years ago. His observation helped us identify a pattern we had overlooked. It changed everything. The billionaire's eyes widened. He leaned back, absorbing the weight of that revelation. He had survived not just because of expertise and technology, but because someone had courageously spoken up despite having no formal authority, no recognition, just the knowledge and the will to act. He insisted on meeting this person immediately. The hospital arranged a quiet meeting in a private room. When the maintenance worker entered, he looked nervous, humble, and unsure why he had been called. He had returned to his routine work, expecting no acknowledgement beyond a simple thank you. The billionaire stood slowly, still weak but determined, and extended a hand. "I want to thank you personally," he said. "You saved my life." The maintenance worker was stunned. He had never expected this moment. I just shared what I remembered." He stammered. "I didn't think it would matter." "It mattered more than you could imagine," the billionaire said firmly. "You saw what no one else could. You acted when it was needed most. Courage, insight, and care, those are what saved me. Not titles, not degrees, not fame. Just you." They talked for a while, quietly. The billionaire asked about his life, about his daughter, about the sacrifices he had made. The maintenance worker shared briefly, careful to keep the story simple and personal, not seeking sympathy or attention. It was a conversation about lives intersecting in an extraordinary way, about humanity and the power of noticing what others might miss. In the days that followed, the billionaire's recovery continued steadily. Doctors adjusted medications, monitored vitals, and slowly removed life support equipment. Each step was measured, careful, and deliberate. He was weak, but growing stronger, able to sit up, eat small meals, and eventually stand with assistance. The media began to report cautiously on recovery, emphasizing the incredible medical team and the rare nature of the illness. But internally, the hospital knew that the story of courage and insight from an unexpected source had made the real diff. Irrence. One morning, the billionaire made a private visit to the maintenance worker's apartment. He brought no cameras, no reporters, just a simple, quiet gesture of gratitude. He spoke directly, honestly, and personally. He offered opportunities, funding for further medical research, support for education, and an invitation to continue working closely with a hospital team in a capacity that respected both skill and insight. The maintenance worker listened, humbled, accepting only what felt necessary for him and his daughter. Recognition was not the goal. The chance to make a difference and ensure the well-being of others had always been enough. As the billionaire resumed his work gradually, he carried a new understanding with him. Power, wealth, and expertise mattered, but sometimes the most profound impact comes from courage, care, and insight that comes from experience rather than title. The hospital returned to normal operations, though the lessons of that period remained deeply embedded in its culture. Staff members spoke quietly about humility, observation, and the importance of listening to every voice, no matter their role. The maintenance worker returned to his routine, his life unchanged in outward appearance but transformed internally. He had witnessed the fragility and resilience of life, the impact of courage, and the power of speaking up. He returned to packing lunches, fixing equipment, and reading quietly with his daughter, knowing that even small actions could change the world. The billionaire never forgot the lesson. He spoke to his executives, to other leaders, emphasizing that insight and courage were found in unexpected places, and that listening could be more important than commanding. He carried with him the story of a man who acted with courage when it mattered most, and the profound impact of human connection. And sometimes in the quiet moments, the billionaire would reflect on that fragile hospital room, the patient barely holding on, the machines keeping time, and the single man who noticed what others could not. It was a reminder that life's miracles often come from the smallest acts of observation, courage, and compassion. In the end, it was not just a recovery story. It was a story of humanity, of courage without recognition, and of how one person's willingness to act could save a life and inspire change far beyond a single moment. It was proof that heroism can take many forms, and sometimes the most extraordinary breakthroughs come from the most ordinary places.